Hello students and welcome to chapter 5-3, Population Dynamics and Carrying Capacity. So population dynamics, they depend on a few things: population size, population density, and dispersion. So the first two are probably pretty obvious to you, but the last one, the spatial patterning, is actually also really important, and we'll talk a little bit more about that one. And then finally, the age structure, and this is the proportion of individuals in each age group. And when we talk about that, we're talking about there's three general categories: your pre-reproductive, reproductive, and post-reproductive. And when we talk about those age groups, we're talking about women, since they're the ones that have the children. So dispersion, what is that? There are three basic categories of dispersion too. And the first one is clumped. When you have like an elephant herd, so the populations occur in clusters. There's uniform, where things are pretty evenly spread out, and then there's random, like dandelions, where do the dandelion seeds land. So as far as the human population goes, when you think about our population dispersion, we are clumped. So when you look, and this is pretty obvious from this map here, why is clumping often an advantage with populations? One is that species will tend to clump where there's resources available, in particular water. Groups will have a better chance of finding resources than individuals alone. You'll protect some animals from predators, and for prey animals, or for predator animals, it'll be easier for them to get prey if they work together. And then groups will actually also help with the mating and caring for young. Types of growth. There are also two types of growth. Exponential occurs when resources are not limiting, and so you'll get, the population increases by a percentage of the whole in any given time. So you get the classic exponential curve, which they call a J-shaped curve. Under ideal conditions, will grow at an exponential rate. So most populations will grow exponentially under ideal conditions. The biotic potential then is the capacity for growth under those ideal conditions. So what is your biotic potential? How fast can you grow? If you give a species everything they could want, you can see what their biotic potential is. The intrinsic rate of growth is going to be that rate at which species would grow if they had unlimited resources and other ideal conditions. So doubling time. There's this important concept in population growth called doubling time. And the rule of 70 says that doubling time is 70 divided by your percentage growth rate. And the math behind that has to do with the natural log function, which we're not going to go into now. Just trust me on this, that it comes pretty close to the actual answer if you use the logarithmic function. So if you're, for example, how do you figure it out? If your population grows at 1.43% each year, then the doubling time will be 70 divided by 1.43, or 49 years. This is a picture from the American Humane Society, and they just show that if you let kittens grow if you let cats grow at their ideal biotic potential, they have a growth rate of 157%. You can double your kittens in just half a year. So that kind of shows you how fast they would grow. And this is why we have laws in Seattle that say you have to spay or neuter your cat. Okay, so exponential growth, the population size increases faster and faster with time. We've also seen things like exponential growth with the coronavirus cases, and it cannot occur forever because eventually some factors are going to limit your population growth. So here's another picture from the Humane Society just showing, well, what about dogs? Their growth rate is not quite as rapid as kittens, probably because they don't have quite as many puppies per litter, and it's 139%, so their doubling time is half a year. Still pretty high. Okay, so Malthusian theory is that population growth has an exponential capacity, but resources increase linearly. So this sets up a conflict because it means you can't keep growing exponentially if eventually your resources are going to limit you. So if you look at the human growth over time, we have been exponential. This is a strange graph, but it shows years to double the human population, and they have some strange numbers in there. But you can see that over time, the number of years it takes the human population to double has decreased and decreased. There is science, however, that is slowed down, and that the time that it took to get from most recently, it's taking longer to add the next million people to the planet than the million before it. So we're actually seeing now that our doubling time is starting to decrease, which means our population growth rate is decreasing. Logistic growth is what you get when there are things that are going to be limiting your growth. So as resources become more and more limiting, your population growth is going to have to slow down. And so you get this S-shaped graph for logistic growth. And if you look at it, logistic growth starts out exponential. So right about here at what they call the inflection point in math, you start to feel your resources and growth starts to slow down until you reach something called the carrying capacity. So the carrying capacity, they use a capital K for it, like Krispy Kremes, I don't know why, but it's the maximum number of organisms that a region can support. So what are those population controls? There's something called environmental resistance, and it's going to be the sum of all those abiotic or biotic factors that are going to limit your population growth. So abiotic factors would be things like temperature, light, nutrients. Biotic factors would be things like your food supply, competitors, etc. And there's two different things it can do. It can act from the top, so it's going to try to keep you below your carrying capacity, because if you exceed it, you're going to suffer a crash. But it can also work from and push you kind of sideways. If this was your true biotic potential, it can also push you so that you're not going to grow as quickly from that perspective. This is a really busy graph, and you can pause on it if you would like, but there's a lot of biotic and abiotic factors and they're kind of work opposite each other as far as whether things are going to cause you to grow to your biotic potential, or whether you're going to have more logistic growth where you're going to decrease because of environmental resistance. And so there's a lot of factors, and it's going to be species dependent on which of these takes place for any particular species. So environmental resistance. When resource base shrinks, increased potential for unequal distribution of resources. This can increase mortality, decrease fecundity, which if you don't know what that means, that's the ability to produce an abundance of offspring, or both. Okay, so less healthy offspring are going to produce fewer offspring, and then population growth will decline to at or below your carrying capacity. So we're going to be studying most of this unit is going to be human population growth, and we'll study that coming up in our next chapter, chapter 6. So there's two different types of population controls. One's density dependent and one's density independent. Density dependent is when the factor which limits the population growth has a greater effect when the population's density increases. Well, what does that mean? It's often due to negative feedback loops. So things like competition. Density dependent controls tend to regulate the population at stable levels. So the idea that the more competition you have, the more it might limit your growth for food, resources, etc. So density independent is when the limiting factor is not affected by population density. For example, a fire is going to take out a population in an area no matter how many organisms were there to begin with. So it's not dependent on the population's density. So we'll go through a few more examples of these so you kind of get the sense of it. So in a larger, denser population, density independent population controls may kill more organisms, but it will not have an increasing effect or kill a greater percentage of the population. A density dependent control has a greater impact in a dense population, a lesser impact in a less dense population. All right, so if you look at these, which of these are density dependent and which are density independent? A flood and a hurricane, density independent, those are natural disasters. It doesn't matter how dense your population is, whether you have a densely populated coastline, say in the case of a hurricane, or a not so dense, it's gonna hurt your population either way, although it will kill more people in a densely populated, if we're gonna talk humans. But the humans being densely populated had no effect on what that hurricane was gonna do. Parasites are going to be more density dependent because they're more easily spread when you have a dense population. Same thing with infectious diseases like the coronavirus. We saw hit cities first and didn't get to the rural areas till a lot later. They think that was a lot dependent on the density of the population. Pollution, density independent. Clean access to food and water, density dependent, because the more population you have, the more those resources might become limiting. And then territory, density dependent. The more population you have, the less territory there is to share. Okay, so here's the other thing that's kind of hard when we talk about, well, how many people can the earth hold? Or when you're talking any species in an area. The carrying capacity is not a fixed number. It tends to change. We've shifted our carrying capacity a lot of times. So if there's increase or decrease in a limiting factor, the carrying capacity can shift. So if we work our soils to the point where the soils give out, we might lower our carrying capacity. However, as a human species, we've tended to go the opposite direction. Okay, so Earth's carrying capacity, we've actually shifted upward several times. When first we went from a hunter-gatherer society to an agricultural society, we moved our carrying capacity. Then the Industrial Revolution really shifted our ability as a species to populate the Earth. And then finally, the Green Revolution, our ability, we learned a little bit about that with the nitrogen fertilizers, but the ability to do industrial scale farming. We're not talking about the Green New Deal, we're talking about the Green Revolution, which was the use of fertilizers, selective breeding, all these techniques to really increase our yields in farming. All of these had an effect on human population size. So when you look at humans over time, it's hard to see the growth here because our population was so little on the scale of this graph. But if you look over here, we had a jump with the Industrial Revolution and then a jump again with the Green Revolution. Okay, so what happens if you exceed your carrying capacity? You're going to exceed your resources, and so you're going to suffer a population crash. So there's a few things that go on here. One is a time lag. It's going to take a while before your population starts to come down because you've exceeded your resources. There's also going to be a reproductive time lag. So if the limiting factor is food, the population first has to overexceed that. And then as the population starts to go hungry, you'll slow down your population growth. Normally what happens is that you will start to oscillate. It's really hard. No species knows where its carrying capacity is. And so you don't know that you've exceeded it until you're past it and start to suffer a crash. Normally though, then once your population comes down, your resources come back and you're able to increase your population again. So this is a negative feedback loop that tends to oscillate then around the carrying capacity. So again, oscillations, results of negative feedback loops. What happens if you exceed it though and your resources can't come back? So if you get to the point, so again, intraspecific competition, you have so much in a population that they're competing with each other for resources. If you get to the point, and this happened to the case of these reindeer on a small island off the coast of Alaska, they completely ate their resources, like gone. If that's the case, then your species may not be able to come back. So if you completely deplete your resources to the point where they cannot recover. Okay, so types of variations in population size, there's 4. There's stable, where your population stays close to the carrying capacity. And if you look at the picture down below, it's not completely level because again, you're never gonna be able to stay exactly at your carrying capacity. There's eruptive, where you have some explosion in growth and then you die off again. The 13 and 17-year cicadas are like this. They come out, they're like everywhere. When I was growing up, we had them come out when I was in grade school and it was just amazing. They were everywhere. You could hear them in the trees just making this noise as they ate the leaves. And then they went away again and they don't come back. I think the ones in my area were the 17-year cicadas. They're cyclic, where you get this kind of boom and bust type population. And often this can happen with the predator-prey relationship, that as the hare population goes up, so does the lynx population because they eat the hares. But as they tend to eat too many hares, then the hare population crashes and then the lynx population crashes. And this can go on indefinitely. And you guys learned a little bit about this in that one activity you did. There's the top-down control where the predators are controlling things, and the bottom-up control where the food supply is controlling the population size. And then there's the fourth one's irregular, like there just is no pattern, and that happens, and scientists are like, what do we call it? We'll call it irregular. All right, and then there's the minimum critical size. We talked more about this in the biodiversity unit, but if, even if the resources are unlimited, if you may not exhibit exponential growth if you don't have a minimum critical size, and that happens when species become deeply endangered. If you don't have enough critical size, you're going to have trouble finding mates. You're going to have too much inbreeding because not enough genetic diversity. So this has happened if we bring species to the brink. Okay, so there are 2 styles of reproductive strategies. Organisms have a limited amount of energy, and they can either swing their energy towards having as many offspring as possible, or they can swing it towards having fewer offspring, but caring for those offspring. So, and that takes a lot of energy. So those 2 things are going to work inversely to each other. All right, so the 2 main types are called R strategists. These are living near their intrinsic growth rates. They tend to have tons of offspring. They live in environments where resources are not limiting, and they have high rates of growth. And then there's K strategists. They tend to live in environments where resources are limiting, and they're going to have lower growth rates. And so they call them K strategists because of that carrying capacity, which again, we call K. All right, so the reproductive strategies, again, where is the energy going? So more energy per offspring with K strategists, less energy, going to have more offspring with R strategists. So there's a bunch of then differences between the 2. R strategists get lots of offspring, K not so much. R strategists, little or no parental care. Think of an insect hatching millions of eggs, no parental care. K strategist, high parental care. Early reproductive age, later reproduction with K strategists. R strategists, most offspring die before reproducing. K strategists, most offspring survive to be reproductive age and then go on to have offspring of their own. All right, and then R strategists, high population growth. K strategist, low population growth. All right, so what are the advantages and disadvantages? Advantages to an R strategist: you can adapt in unstable ecosystems because you have a really high population growth rate. You can rebound quickly after a disruption that might wipe out your population. Disadvantages: your adults tend to be smaller. You tend to have a lot of, again, think of like egg hatching with insects, fish, less able to compete. Your population size can fluctuate wildly above and below your carrying capacity. So niches, they're going to be more generalized and early successional species. K strategists, you're going to have large adults, you're going to be better able to compete, and your population size generally tends to stay fairly stable. Disadvantages: because the population growth rate is low, you're going to be not able to rebound as quickly after there's some kind of disruption event. And so you're going to be a little bit more extinction prone if things change. They're going to be more specialists, late successional species. All right, so realize that these are not either or. There's a continuum of species. Scientists love to classify things, but nature in the world is rarely able to be that easily pigeonholed. Okay, so there is going to be a range of differences, a continuum of strategies. So many birds kind of fall in between the two. And then things might also change in different conditions or at different times. So this one, the mouth brooding cichlid, very large number of offspring, but provides some parental care. That's a DeBrew edition. I know nothing about the cichlid, but it's kind of funky looking. Okay, so as far as categorizing then, think about these and whether or not they're R strategists or K strategists. The ant, definitely R strategists. Sequoia trees, they don't reproduce very quickly, so they're K strategists. Elephant, high parental care, not that many offspring, K strategists. Coral, R strategists. Dandelions, definitely R strategists. Okay, so which one's more likely to be an invasive species? If you think about it, R strategists, because they're more able to quickly reproduce and establish themselves in a new ecosystem. So if you're able to really reproduce quickly, you're going to have the advantage in a new ecosystem. And that murder hornet, since I'll continue the theme, they discovered 200 new queens about to hatch in that nest they recently took out. So if which species are going to be adversely affected by an invasive species? Those are going to be the K strategists. Again, because they have a slow reproduction rate, they're not going to be able to come back as easily. They're also tend to be more specialists, and if something comes in and competes with them in their specialized niche, it might be hard for them to come back. So survivorship curves. There's three kinds of curves. There's type 1, which is late loss, which means high mortality is late in life. These are going to be usually your K strategists. We are this way. Type 2, constant loss. This is the one that's hardest for me to understand, but basically there's mortality is about the same at any age. This would be bizarre if humans were this. Imagine losing a certain percentage of our population at any age group. And then there's type 3, which is early loss. And that means high mortality early in life. These tend to be your R strategists. A lot of those salmon eggs that hatch don't live very long, or they don't survive, or insect eggs, etc. So that concludes our lecture for today. And next time we'll be looking at chapter 6.